Okay, so picking up where we left off yesterday, do you see why it goes from Genesis 37 to Genesis 38 to focus on Judah before it goes back to Genesis 39? What would you say is the reason for that? It's talking about Joseph, sharp break, maybe not sharp break, talk about Judah, back into Genesis 39, talking about Joseph. Okay, exactly. That's the transition into Genesis 38. And the reason is because Judah, we have an inkling, is going to be the one through whom the line comes because of all of the kids that were born. Leah praises the Lord with Judah, and that's different. You know, every other child, every other son was trying to get Jacob's affection. Judah makes her just happy with the Lord. And then we know, is Reuben still on top as firstborn? No, because he took Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, so that he could get all the affection for his side of the family. So he's disinherited from being firstborn anyway. What about Levi and Simeon? They're the next two oldest. Yes, they did the massacre at Shechem, which, although we wish Jacob would have been more involved, they didn't do it right. The equivalent of what they did in Shechem would be like drowning someone when you're baptizing them. It was taking the sign, the mark of the covenant, like baptism, and killing them with it. So that is like as nasty as it gets. I mean, imagine somebody celebrating their relationship with the Lord, and as you dip them under the water, you just hold them till they drown. That's what they did to Shechem. Okay? So Simeon and Levi, they have passion, and that passion was exercised negatively with Shechem. But what will we see with Levi's passion in Exodus 32? His zeal, their zeal. They'll stand with Moses, unlike anyone else, in getting away from the golden calf. And then Phinehas will be known for his zeal and stopping the plague of God. And it's of Phinehas, I think it's Psalm 106. It's the only other person in the Old Testament where it says, and it was credited to him as righteousness. That Phinehas' faith in doing what he did to that Simeonite and that Midianite or Moabite woman was a great act of faith. It was like Moses or Abraham looking at the stars, and it was credited to him as righteousness when he believed. So that's a high water mark for the tribe of Levi, from which Phinehas is from. And then Simeon, unfortunately, several Simeonites will fall at Baal of Peor. But then they'll be part of Judah, which is a good thing. So Simeon and Levi both have good turns, but all of this to say that now it's on Judah. The eyes are on Judah because he's the next born. Now, I can't remember. By the way, I did look up something yesterday that I wasn't sure about the other day, and I found the answer. Cain, the Hebrew word used for Cain killing Abel is premeditated murder. Remember how I wasn't sure if it was or not? It is. Which makes God's grace on Cain. It's the same word that when you get into Deuteronomy 19, where it says, you know, if I'm watching these guys building this building out here, you know, and it's like if one of them like pushed one of those boards off one of those cement columns and it knocked his friend and he went off, he would not be guilty of murder, right? But if someone was doing something, they looked out of the corner of their eye and they saw a guy launch a guy off the building, that's premeditated murder. And the law delineates between that. It makes them distinct. And Cain was an outright murderer. He wanted to kill Abel. It wasn't, I'm mad, I punched him, and he died. It was, he rose up and struck him. So it's a bad thing. Okay, but what was I just saying I wasn't sure about? The other thing I needed to check? Oh, this is what it was. I got to check the dates of Joseph, because I remember reading somewhere that Joseph, in the timeline, because Leah is the one that has the first 4 boys, and they're told in succinct order. But then Rachel conceives, and I thought I remember reading somewhere that Joseph was like third born as far as age. You always think of Joseph as young, but there was a timeline. I'll have to check that. And that, I say that to say that Joseph and Judah, of the two, who would you think, if Joseph is chronologically in the area of Judah, which I'm pretty sure I remember reading that. And you can figure it out from the scriptures. You just have to line up a bunch of stuff. But if that's the case, who would you choose to be the line? If you were God, you choose Joseph, right? Which makes the grace of the Lord, like Judah shows you how deep the grace of God goes. Much better than Joseph would have. Because guys, you can't get much worse than Judah. I mean, he had 2 horrendously wicked sons, as wicked as the flood days and as Sodom and Gomorrah. Which means that he's a wicked guy. And then you see him, how wicked he is, all throughout Genesis 38. And God still chooses him, and then he chooses to break him with Tamar. Okay? And Tamar will be in the line of Christ. Okay, any questions so far? Goal today is to make it through Leviticus. Ambitious, you say? Okay. All right, back to 39. Joseph and his dreams. Okay. So, or not his dreams. These are the other guy's dreams. So you've got Joseph and, let's see. This is not, I'm moving ahead in my notes. Okay, so we're going back. All right, so we'll do Genesis 39 and 40. So this is Joseph, and then Joseph and his dreams. Okay, so just real quick, we're going to finish up Genesis fast. Just a couple things to note. I'm going to kind of move big picture with Genesis as we finish it here. The Lord never speaks directly to Joseph. Do you know that? It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? It's pretty remarkable that Joseph does as well as he does without one single audible word from God. He has dreams, but it never records one word that God said to Joseph. It says that he was with him, but not one word. And Joseph is about as close, not as about. Joseph is the closest to what Adam should have been in the entire book of Genesis. So Genesis starts with Adam failing to do what God called him to do. Genesis finishes with Joseph doing everything God called Adam to do. The entirety of the earth came to Joseph to be blessed. That's what Adam was to be. So Joseph is an incredible character. Now, do I think that he did start out naive and foolish, like I said yesterday? Yeah, I do. I don't try to whitewash what Joseph did with his brothers. I think he was a little bit of a punk and didn't, was a spoiled guy. But God brought him, he strips him of his robe. He goes into Potiphar's house. Potiphar's wife wants to sleep with him. It says he refuses to be in the same room with her, which I think is a good thought for any of us that struggle with sexual temptation, that Joseph just refused to be anywhere near close to the temptation. Unlike the Proverbs boy who goes near her corner, right? So I think that's a helpful thought to consider for men. But anyway, basically you get the idea that Potiphar doesn't really trust his wife. If a Hebrew slave tried to sleep, they scorned Hebrews. Hebrews were shepherds. They were unclean. They were dirty. The Egyptians thought working with animals was, for the lesser. So they wouldn't, remember, Joseph doesn't even eat with his brothers because it was unkosher. They weren't, okay? So it would have been nothing for Potiphar to have Joseph killed for trying to sleep with his wife, right? Because she takes his garment This is the second garment he loses. He loses his robe, he loses his garment. And then he goes into the pit. So it would have been nothing for Potiphar to kill him. I think the fact that Potiphar didn't kill Joseph is because he knew his wife. That's what I think. And he just puts him in prison, which he could have easily had him killed. So that's just something to consider. But so he goes into prison. He's there for 2 years. And he has these guys that are really interesting. They remind us a little bit of Melchizedek. These two guys that have dreams. Why would I say they remind us of Melchizedek? These two guys in prison. Bread and wine. Pretty interesting, isn't it? He's the cupbearer and the baker. The other one's the baker. So it's kind of like a phantom Melchizedek meeting Joseph in prison. Okay, cupbearer and baker. Remember, are these details just thrown out there for story's sake? No, the Holy Spirit doesn't waste his breath. So he goes in and he explains their dreams to them. You know, the cupbearer, he gets a very favorable response. So the baker thinks, oh, you know. But there are differences in their dreams. They each share 3 branches on a vine or 3 baskets on a head. They have a number 3 in there. Each in the realm of service. Pharaoh is mentioned in each, but the contrast is the cupbearer is engaged while the baker is just, stuff's happening to him. The cupbearer is doing something. And then the cupbearer is in the immediate presence of Pharaoh and the baker is not. And so Joseph makes these 2 interpretations, one good, one bad. They get taken out of prison, one taken back to Pharaoh, one with his head cut off or hung, or birds eat his head. It's not good. Okay, so Joseph really wants the cupbearer to remember him, and he doesn't. And so this continues on, but God uses this. He's using it in Joseph's life, and he's using it in his brothers' lives. And eventually, Joseph gets remembered, and he gets re-robed. And this is with a high robe, okay? So I think it's worth considering. I mean, he tells you about him losing clothes, like on purpose, right? So let's just think through Joseph's wardrobe, okay? All right, so he starts with a many-colored robe like a priest, okay? All right. And then that gets stripped off of him, so he's made naked. He gets sold into slavery, and he gets clothed in Potiphar's house. That gets stripped off of him, and he goes into prison, into the pit. Then he's reclothed, second in authority. Do you guys see any connections there with Christ? Can we think through that? Okay, so let's just think through it. He starts with a many-color robed, favored of his father. Does that sound familiar? Huh? In thinking of Jesus. Huh? Okay, this is my beloved son. But let's talk about Jesus' journey. He was in glory with his Father. Okay? So Jesus' many-colored robe, favored of his Father in glory. Okay? Then he comes down to earth, like Joseph goes to the pit. Okay? And he's disrobed of glory. He loses his glory. Philippians 2. He did not count it equality with God. He did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but instead chose and became a servant. Okay? Okay, so he becomes a servant, which is the essence of the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. So he does that, and he does it very well in Potiphar's house. Potiphar is blessed. He loves Joseph. I think that's also why he didn't have him killed. So he's very pleased with Joseph. He's doing a good job in service, but then he's stripped of that robe too and made naked. What is that? So Jesus is on earth. He's serving. He's doing a great job, but he's stripped of that robe and made naked. What would that be the equivalent to? On the cross, the crucifixion, okay? So he's made naked then, and then from Potiphar's house, he's thrown into, it says prison, but twice it says he's pulled out of the pit. So he goes into the pit. What's the pit like? Death, right? Burial, okay? So he goes down into the earth, and then he's taken out of the earth when he's vindicated, okay? And what does he do? Bless the whole world. So we have to say, okay, somehow all of this unifies in Jesus. How does it do that? And we have the narrator tell us these things on purpose. He's always talking about his clothes. Like, why did he do that? Why didn't he just say, Joseph ran away? Well, that wouldn't make much sense of her having proof that he tried to sleep with her as much as having his garment. So there's that, but also it's another time he got disrobed. So I think this is an important connection to consider in terms of Christ. Okay, so he names his kids Manasseh, I've quite forgotten the pain. Ephraim, fertile land or fruitful. So it's funny that we've got a song in the U.S. that goes, and if I sing, like, it'll break cameras and sound things and stuff, so I won't try to sing it. But it says, the words are, "You're so vain." Okay? It's a girl singing. She's talking about the guy that she liked. Okay? It's like an oldies song from like the 50s. She says, "You're so vain. You probably think this song is about you." Now, why is that funny? Because it is about him. He's sitting over there saying, "Yeah, she's still not over me." So Joseph names his sons Manasseh, I've quite forgotten, and Ephraim, I'm in a fertile land. But I think both of those, I think Manasseh, which one is thinking about what he's lost more, Manasseh or Ephraim? Manasseh, because he's saying, I've forgotten. And you're like, forgotten what? Like, you haven't forgotten. That's why you're still talking about it, right? So Joseph is in discovery, but then you have Ephraim and it's fruitful. And I do think Ephraim is a shift. I think Ephraim is the equivalent to Leah naming Judah praise. I think Ephraim is, I'm fruitful here. Like, God has been good. And who's blessed? Manasseh or Ephraim? Ephraim. So there seems to be this correlation where God loves to heap blessing on the faith moments and really make those shine. Okay. All right. And so now we enter into the Adamic Joseph. We talked about he's raised up. He's given all authority and power in Egypt, and he's using it to bless the earth once he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. And Pharaoh says, where can we find a guy like this? So he elevates the new Adam, and this is the best Adam yet. He has the Spirit of God, verse 38. He's wearing fine linen and gold. What does that remind you of? Priests wear fine linen and gold. And yeah, he's everything that Adam was meant to be. All the earth is united in Joseph. Okay? All right, so now we've got this saga continuing of God is going to bring his people out of the land into Egypt. Why is he going to do that? If you take my opinion, 2 reasons. Jacob and Abraham. What did Abram do that would necessitate Israel going in bondage to the Egyptians? Solomon? He mistreated Hagar. And you couldn't say it any better, because that's kind of the word that's used in both what they did to Hagar and what the Egyptians did to Israel. So I think that's connected. And then I think also Jacob. Why would you say Jacob? Do you remember? He did not honor his father. And so for that reason, he'll be the shortest lived patriarch, and he'll die outside of the land. Okay? So I think that's what's going on there. So, but here's the deal. Just like the ark was a movable Eden, just so Goshen will be the floatable Eden. And Goshen, shocker, is the best land in Egypt. Why would God choose anything else to be Eden except Goshen? They get the best property in Egypt. It's incredible. Okay? And so, but here's the deal. Is it easy to enter back into Eden? No, it's not easy. What's stationed there? Sword and fire. So to get back in through Eden, you need to die and be reborn. You need to go through fire and ashes. Dust. You need to become dust and ashes. Now, we talked about yesterday, you can become dust and ashes by putting dust on your head and sitting in ashes. And is it the actual dust and ashes that make you repentant? No, they're just a visible expression of your heart. So you can be repentant without dust and ashes, without going through a fire. That's why David says, after he sinned with Bathsheba, God, if you wanted a burnt offering, I'd give it. But your offering, your sacrifice, is a broken heart and a contrite spirit. That's the sacrifice that pleases you. And God, because David knows God, he says to Israel, get your sacrifices away from me. I don't want another bull. I'm not hungry. I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. I don't need birds. I'm just fine. Come to me with a right heart. That's what's important, okay? So when Israel, Jacob and his sons are coming into Goshen, they need to go through sword and fire, dust and ashes. But that doesn't have to be visible. It can be internal. And this turns into, what was Adam in the garden? He was a guardian of the garden, or he was supposed to be. He was supposed to guard the perimeter, just like angels are perimeter angels. Joseph was to be a perimeter sentry of the garden. He was to guard it. He was to not let people in that were unclean, just like the priests will do. If anybody tries to approach, they'll get speared like Phineas speared the Simeonite. Okay, you can't approach God like that with filth on your heart. So Joseph now is acting as a sentry of Goshen. He's acting as a sentry of Eden. So what he's going to do is he's going to test his brother's repentance. As they come, he will not let them enter the land dirty. So he's going to test them. Have they changed? Okay? And so what happens is that God in his goodness is bringing these boys to Egypt because there's a famine. Okay? And so they go to Egypt, and Joseph begins putting them through a process of tests. And so they go to Egypt, but did Jacob send Benjamin the first time? No. He did not send Benjamin the first time. So they go, and there's all kinds of interesting parallels between what's now happening to the brothers and what happened to Joseph. Okay? Just listen as I read. This is from chapter 42. As Joseph's fate was uncertain when he was going out to his brothers, so now their fate is uncertain in going to Joseph. Do you see that? Remember when Joseph's walking out to his brothers, and they're like, oh, let's kill this guy, right? Well, now he's walking to his brother, or they're walking to Joseph, and Joseph could have all them killed. Do you see how the tables have turned? Okay, so that's one commonality. Another one, as Joseph was sent by his father, now they're sent by their father. Okay, the same word is used 3 times for them recognizing Joseph as he came to them and him recognizing them 3 times. He says he recognized them. He identified them. Okay. Oh, no, excuse me. That's not with them seeing them. I got that wrong. The recognized and identified that Joseph recognized and identified them is the same word. This is even cooler. It's the same word that was used when they brought the coat to Jacob and said, do you recognize this? Which is what Judah probably came up with. And now he's recognizing them. So it's like the exact opposite that happened. Jacob recognizes Joseph's dead, and now he's recognizing them, and he's clearly not dead. Okay? And guys, one thing I forgot to tell you yesterday. You remember when Jacob gets that coat, and he puts sackcloth on his loins, and he says, I'm going to go to the earth in sadness, In the very next verse, it says, and Joseph was on his way to Egypt. Which tells you, when you have the worst thing imaginable you think happen in your life, God's in the midst of doing something good with it. So Jacob's like, oh, it's hopeless. Very next verse, the narrator says, and Joseph's on his way to Egypt. To do what? To save the world. So, I told you guys, the guy that's been just a huge influence in my life, they just put him on hospice care. And what that means in the U.S. is that you've got just a few days probably left. And so that's a real sad thing. He was sick, but this took on a really fast turn. And it's really hard being away from him. But I just this whole week have to trust God's got a better plan than I could ask or imagine. And that's what he had for Jacob in his deepest sorrow. So, okay, so let's keep going with the commonalities. In 37:4, it says that they won't speak to their brother. They couldn't even speak to him. When he tells them his dreams and stuff, during that time, even before that time, I think, it says they couldn't really talk to him. And now they say, we are all sons of one man. And they don't know they're saying that to their brother, but it's kind of ironic that they're saying that when he's standing there. He puts them all in custody. That's the same word that's used to describe him going into custody. So do you see what they're experiencing? You see what God has them experience? Exactly what they did to their brother. Guys, that's what brings about repentance. When God puts you through and has you understand what you did to the other person. That's where he brought Judah, where he goes, I'm the unrighteous one. Like, he finally saw clearly what he had done to Tamar. And that's what God's doing to all of these brothers. So after 3 days, he comes to them with the plan of leaving one there so that they can go get Benjamin. Okay? And 2 times they're forced to bring Joseph up to Joseph. 2 times. When he asks them how many brothers they have and that sort of thing. And so God's just bringing this whole event back to their minds. And so what do? He puts money in their sacks and sends them home. And who stays? You remember? Simeon stays. So think of what's happening now. They're going home to their dad with one less brother and richer. Does that sound familiar? They sent Joseph away, made money, came home to their dad, one less brother, and wealthier. He's having them experience exactly what they did to him, but it's only going to get worse. So they're just tasting what they did to him. He wants them to have the full meal because he's testing them, because he's a good guardian. He's a good guardian of the area, okay? So they come home, chapter 43, without Simeon. Jacob's like, you guys are the biggest losers on planet Earth. How can I not send you away without you losing one of my boys? Like, what is wrong with you guys? And they're like, Dad, it's even worse than that. He wants Benjamin. And now they're having to face another Joseph, because who is Benjamin? He's the son of Rachel. So he's the next favored kid, right? Next to Joseph. So now Joseph's having them experience that jealousy all over again, not with him this time, but with Benjamin. So all of those emotions, how are you going to respond? You know, a guy goes to prison for murdering somebody. What did the guy do? Well, the guy ran him off the road in the car and they got in a fight and he killed him. Now he's in prison. He gets out of prison. He gets back in a car and he starts driving and somebody runs him off the road. What's he going to do? Has he changed, right? Has he been reformed? It's getting faced with the same thing and acting different. That is repentance. That is a changed heart of God where you're encountering the same temptation, but you're taking a different route this time. And that's what these guys are facing. They're facing the other thing. Now, does this condone Jacob's favoritism? No, it's pathetic. Jacob is a pathetic character, and he'll tell you that in just a few verses. Okay? So I'm not trying to speak bad about the guy. It's awful how he favored. But you know what? Does God have the right to be sovereign who he blesses and who he doesn't? He does. And so you still honor your dad, even if you're not the favored one. As soon as, God will deal with Jacob. Don't you worry about that. But you don't take it into your own hands like Reuben, right? And so he's faced with it. Reuben can't convince him. Reuben gives like a speech, but you can tell that all of the power is out of Reuben. He cannot lead anymore. Jacob doesn't even pay attention to him. And then Judah stands up and speaks, and he wins the day. And Jacob says, okay, you can do it. Now, why is it important that Judah win the day? Because Judah's the one that got this whole thing going the way it did, right? So God's really narrowing in on Judah because he's the guilty one. So now Judah was the negotiator to get him to go into slavery. Now Judah is the negotiator to take care of Benjamin. He used his negotiative power to get rid of Joseph. Now he's using his negotiating power to protect Benjamin. Do you see how a total change has happened in Judah? Same situation, favored son, and he's going like this. Hey, Dad, I got him. It'll be all right. I'll take care of him. So he goes from being the guy getting rid of the favored one to the guy hugging the favored one. It's crazy, right? Because God is he's killing these guys before they get into Eden. That's what he's doing. And he's using the wisdom of Joseph to get it done, the wisdom that he's giving him. So they go. So they get there for the perfect test. Everything up until this point has been a very good test, but it's about to get good. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. So in chapter 43, they get there, and guys, and by the way, they're bowing down to him not once, not twice, a third time's coming, okay? So when the dream says they'll bow down, you're like, okay, was it when they like tied their shoes? No, they will, at the end of this thing, throw themselves to the earth before him. Like, it's not like this, it's like this, okay? So they go, Judah wins. They get there, and in chapter 43, they sit down to eat. They serve the food, and what they do is they serve the food in order. Joseph has them serve the food in order from oldest to youngest. Now, guys, let's see. 3, 5, 7. All right. So we got 9 guys in here. Well, we got 11 over there. All right. So you're all sitting there. You're all different ages. Okay. You're all from not just different ages. You're all from different moms. Okay. You're all from different moms, and he has them serve them in perfect order. Would that make you a little like, what's going on here? This is crazy. And then he gets to Benjamin, and what does he do to Benjamin? 5 times as much. So he is rubbing favoritism in their face. And they're sitting there saying, no matter where this kid goes, he gets everything. This is crazy. And I think that's Joseph's touch of saying, if this is what God wants, who are you to argue with it? Because now it's not Jacob giving Benjamin 5 times as much, it's God, right? So, because that's who's ultimately in charge, right? I mean, as bad as Jacob is, God's still sovereign. So Benjamin gets it. So he sends them on their way. He sends them with Simeon and has them go. So he gives them food, gives them money, just loads them up, all right? So they get out of Egypt, they're heading home, and all of a sudden, they hear horse clops and dust rising in the air, and they turn around, maybe chariots, and they look, and here's Joseph and his crew. And they say, who stole my silver? Who stole my silver cup? How could you guys do this? As nice as I was to you, you stole my silver cup. Now, does silver ring a bell? They sold him for silver. All right? So they go, no. We would never do that. Never. So Joseph's like, all right, let's search your bags. And guess which order he searches them in? Oldest to youngest again. Now, guys, you're all sitting there saying, if I go home to my dad without his favorite kid one more time. So it starts with the oldest. He opens it up. Okay, now you're saying, I actually hope it's somebody that's just not Benjamin. Okay? Down, 11 deep. And sure enough, it's Benjamin. Now, the perfect test has been launched. Because here's the deal. They've got food. Remember when they put Joseph in the pit, what did they do afterwards? They ate. And they recount that in this story, that they remember when he was crying for his life in the pit. So they're sitting there eating food like animals while Joseph's begging for his life. Okay? So now, they're going home with food, just like they ate a meal when they threw Joseph in the pit. They're going home richer because he gave them a boatload of cash. And they're going home with one less favored brother who actually did it himself. They were the ones that wronged Joseph. They know that. But Benjamin stole the cup. So now they could go home to the dad. Totally justified. Dad, he stole a cup. Your favorite little guy who never does anything wrong stole a cup. Maybe you had the wrong guy. It's not our fault this time. Do you see how it's the absolute perfect test? To test repentance. And it says, I think it says they all tore their clothes. As one man, they mounted their camels and went back to Egypt. Guys, are these a different sort of people from the guys that sold Joseph? Judah then speaks up to Joseph and gives the most eloquent speech that says, listen, if we go back to our dad like this, he will just straight up die. Please, take me instead. You can't find a more polar opposite Judah than you found in Genesis 37. You just can't find it. He straight up is saying, I'm your guy. Let him go. Why? Because my dad loves him. He loves him more than you? Yeah. Please take him. Like, it is just like, oh my goodness. This guy's brand new. He's brand new. And Joseph at this point has tested their repentance to the full. And he reveals himself to them. He weeps. It's unbelievable. And then it says, they all ate and drank and were merry with him. So it's like, you go from they couldn't even speak to him, that's how the story started, to now they're just kicking it up and enjoying life together. It's beautiful. Now, just like everybody else in the story of Genesis, will the brothers stay good? No, as soon as they leave town, they'll make up a story like that when Jacob dies, or Joseph, when Jacob dies, they tell Joseph, hey, Dad said before he died to be nice to us. Like, so they're still afraid, there's still some sin in them, but they've been tested, they've been weighed, and they've been found pleasing to the Lord. And as a result, they'll make it into the promised land, okay? Or not in the promised land, into the new Eden, which is Goshen. Okay, and so we have the perfect test passed. It says they talked with him. In 45:15 is where it says that. Verses 37:4 where they wouldn't even speak to him. On the way there, it refers to this group as the men. 9 times it calls them the men. But after the test, they're now called brothers 9 times. So do you see that? They came in separately, and then they end up together. Okay? And so these are just some important things to point out. Then we have a new Jacob in chapter 46. Guys, so think about this. How did Jacob start his life? What was his name? The heel grabber, okay? The tripper-upper, all right? Then he moves to being tripped himself, and he walks with a... Okay? Now when he goes to Egypt, do you know how he gets there? He rides in a carriage, a wagon, a cart, with the women and the children. See, guys, I think this is a picture of what does Jesus say about who can enter the kingdom of heaven? Unless you enter like a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think God has broken down Jacob, who had a million plates spinning and carried everything himself, did everything his way, manipulated every situation just right. I think God slowly took all the fight out of Jacob in that way to where he's content being with the children. He became like a child. And Jacob is really good from here on out. In fact, when he's about to leave the promised land, he's not sure he should leave. Because he wants to stay there so bad. Even for Joseph. Who was Jacob's idol, guys? It was Joseph. But he doesn't want to leave the promised land even for Joseph. And God has to come to him and say, no, it's okay, you go. And so he offers sacrifices before he leaves. It's very, very good. And Jacob goes and he meets Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says to him, man, you're such an old guy. And he goes, no. My years have been few and evil, and they have not attained to that of my fathers. So Jacob recognizes that's his Judah moment, where he realizes who he's been, who he is. And 70 people go, and that is a sign of the new world. These are the 70 people that will replace the 70 nations or bless the 70 nations. Chapter 47, this is where Jacob is pronounced, shown to be a new guy when he talks to Pharaoh. And I can't remember, does he... Yes, that's another very cool thing that Jacob does, is he blesses Pharaoh, which is pretty awesome. And we'll find in the Exodus that Pharaoh asks to be blessed as well. So yeah, Jacob's just doing great. And then you move into the blessings, which, we call them blessings now because blessing is mentioned 3 times. Okay? Now, how does Genesis start? Day 5 and day 6, what do we see introduced? Blessing, okay? And so now Genesis has begun with blessing, and now what is it doing? It's closing with blessing. And you'll find that that's often the case, that books are bookended. Just like Genesis is opened with blessing in Adam, it's closing with blessing in Joseph. You see that? Okay, so it's bookended like that. So Jacob gives blessing, but as you read these blessings, you'll find that some of them are curses, essentially. And this is, again, where Jacob shines. Jacob does really, really well here. And that he speaks truth to his sons. He is not like his father Isaac, who wanted to bless Esau when Esau shouldn't have been blessed. He straight up goes through each brother, and he says to Reuben, Reuben, my firstborn, as shifty as water, he came up onto my couch. And what's he talking about? When he slept with Bilhah. So guys, just imagine all of you guys in this room standing around a dad on his deathbed, and he says to Netzanet his sin in front of everybody, and then moves to the next guys and says, Simeon and Levi, I do not want to come in your council. You guys are bloodthirsty men, and I don't want you in my council. Yeah, that's what you're doing. It's like you're dodging, right? And then he moves on to the next people. Guys, like, this is what judgment of God is like. I mean, it's for real. There's no this with God, right? And Jacob's doing that, and he's doing it honestly. And then he gets to Judah, and he will carry the scepter. And Judah will be the one. And Jacob recognizes it. So Jacob has very good spiritual insight post his breaking. But Judah's not totally broken yet. Because do you know where he gets totally broken? This is like, remember how Judah gets faced, we just talked about, with the exact same thing and responds totally differently? Well, now Jacob gets faced with the exact same thing when his favorite son, Joseph, brings him Manasseh and Ephraim to bless before he dies, right? And guys, if you have a favorite son, I don't have a favorite son, at least I can't say it on camera. No, I'm just kidding. But we've got 5 sons, and I know how hard it is when my son and I are having a really good relationship, when he wants something, and for me to say, no, we're not going to do that. Like, that's not easy. Like, I want to please him. I want that. I want him to be happy, right? So of all the boys that Jacob would want to be happy, it would be Joseph. It was clearly his favorite, okay? He brings him Manasseh and Ephraim, and Jacob switches his hands. Guys, what is he doing? Instead of pleasing his favored son, like Isaac pleased Esau, or tried to, Jacob is switching the blessings as Isaac should have done. But the deeper thing behind that is, what did Jacob not trust God to do? He did not trust God to trade the blessings with him and Esau, and he did it himself. So what Jacob's doing is what he should have trusted God to do way back in the day, but he couldn't, and he got it himself. And him doing that, and Jacob trying to move his arm, or Joseph trying to move Jacob's arms, and I told you guys, the grab is forceful. Joseph was like angry when he did it. That unmovability of Jacob's arm, and he goes, no, my son, this is, I know what I'm doing. Jacob should have trusted God to do that, like he just did. But he didn't. But now he's seeing that from the outside looking in, and he's a different man. Okay? So the book ends with, we finally have Adam in a garden blessing the world. Two problems. The garden is not God's garden, and Adam dies. That's how the book of Genesis ends. Look at this. You've got your best Adamic character in the entire book. He's blessing. It's looking incredible, minus the fact that they're outside of the land. But look at what it says. Verse 26, chapter 50. So Joseph died. Being 110 years old, he lived shorter than Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Guys, totally intentional. God's best guy is outside of the land and dead and embalmed. That's pretty awful. So, and Egypt, anytime you go to Egypt, you go down to Egypt. You'll read it in the Bible. You go down to Egypt. Anytime you go to Jerusalem, you go up to Jerusalem. They went up to Jerusalem. That's why it's the Psalms of Ascent, right? Because you're climbing. All right. So guys, what does Israel need? If Israel is dead in a tomb in Egypt, what do they need? They need what? They need resurrection. And we have in Genesis 50 that resurrection kind of being pictured in Jacob dying and getting taken out of the land. Okay? So when Jacob gets taken out of the land, it says that the people went up out of the land 6 times. The narrative, and this is kind of the Exodus foreshadowed. The narrator stresses all the servants of Pharaoh accompanied them, all the elders of the land of Egypt, all the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's household went. And then it says the chariots and the horsemen, which reminds you of the fact that they'll be buried in the Dead Sea. It says that the Canaanites responded to Jacob's body coming back into the land. In verse 11, like Rahab will respond when Jacob gets back in the land. And then the route they take out of Egypt into the promised land is the exact route that God will have Israel take out of Egypt into the promised land. Okay, so all of these things set up the fact that a resurrection exodus is coming. Okay? All right. Let's see here. Yes, questions before we get into Exodus? Yeah, that's a good question, Abel. In that situation, and I'm not trying to make excuses here, in the law, when you steal somebody and enslave them, that is considered equal with murder. It's a capital offense. So, it's man stealing. That's as though you stole someone's life. Does that make sense? Okay. So, Joseph has died as we know it when he goes to Egypt, according to the law. Does that make sense? And so he marries, and the question is does God bless that? We see how much he doesn't want them to marry with Abraham and Isaac and Rebekah. So my answer to that would be, I think God was okay with this in that Manasseh and Ephraim become part of the tribes. They each become a tribe. So God blesses it, is my point. Yeah. I also think that is an offshoot reason. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I think the biggest reason is that Judah is a great spectacle of God's grace. I think that's the biggest reason. I think Judah is like Abraham versus Adam and Noah. Adam and Noah were like up here, the best you can get. Abraham was like Judah. He's down here. He's just a pagan. He worships idols. Nothing righteous about him. Spiritual, physical dead end. And I think Judah is a spiritual dead end. And so God says, watch this. Yeah, that's a good question.